If you're judging how long each book took, it's hard to judge it from publication dates because they can be a bit deceptive. In fact, each book took about 2 to 2.5 years. But because of the way in which the publication works, it looks like it took less for the second book. But the third book, Agent 6, also took the same amount of time. So it wasn't that it took more. It was different. The Secret Speech had a lot of the same research from Child 44 because the two periods were very close together. Whereas the third book and the final book in the trilogy, there's a gap of many decades, and it's a completely different world of the Russian occupation of Afghanistan and of New York communism. It's the two completely different research periods. So it was actually probably more research work than the Secret Speech. Yeah, they're all based upon some seed of historical research, and then it's a question of growing it from that. And Agent 6, if Child 44 is based upon Andrei Chikatilo, Agent 6, the strongest person was Paul Robeson, and the one character is the American communism. And there's about this plot of how the Russian Communist Society used race as a way of bringing down America. And I'd never come across this. It's quite a sort of unknown element of the espionage, the secret world, that you would try and exploit race as a political tool from one country between another. And they thought maybe we could use race to bring down America. Maybe we could use race to cause a revolution, because they'd also tried on women's rights and that hadn't worked. And Paul Robeson was one of the few famous Americans who was also explicitly pro-communist. And he's a fascinating character. He's a mix of this sort of incredible, wonderful, positive ideology about equality and fairness. But he has some blind spots. He was so in love with the Soviet regime that when he was confronted with evidence about the gulags, he said that he dismissed them and said that if they were true, then only a few fascists died in the gulags. So he was the seed for a character called Jesse Austen in Agent 6. That's very important. So yeah, all three books actually grow from that sort of truth, that sort of real person, and then I fictionalize it around that. Yeah, I mean, Agent 6 is definitely the last Leo story. I mean, the way I saw it is that you follow his life and the regime side by side. And in a sense, he's this young man who is idealistic in Child 44. You have Stalinism at its sort of most awful in that book. You then have that period after Stalinism, the Khrushchev era, which is what happens after a terrible dictator like Stalin, what happens next? And for Leo, the question is what happens after that begins to crumble as well? What does he do after being a secret police officer? So those two things marry. And in the final book, Agent 6, you have the end of this regime. And I try to find the historical event that I thought captured it most sort of powerfully, and that was the invasion of Afghanistan. It really felt like this was a regime that was dying. This was a regime that had lost its way completely. And I think Afghanistan really sucked any of the remaining life out of that regime. So to put Leo, who's now a much older man, into that world, it felt like you were doing two things. You were telling his last story, and you were telling the last story of this regime at the same time. So it's very, it kind of arcs in that very clean way. So there's no more, I can't imagine. I also really like the end point. I won't give it away, but the end point for Agent 6, I feel like it's the right place to put Leo. It's the right place to have brought him to. I couldn't imagine moving him into another setting. I feel like he's at his right place at the end of Agent 6.